Has this happened to you? You met or saw someone new during the pandemic and have only seen them with a mask on. Then, when you saw them for the first time without a mask on, you were surprised when you saw what the rest of their face looked like. You know, oh, what a beautiful smile she has, or, I would have guessed he'd have had more teeth. We are starting to come out of the worst of the pandemic. I don't want to be glib about that, as I know there are many people still suffering, and that there are parts of the world in great crises right now in light of the havoc of this disease. But for most of us in this country, there are some simple signs of progress, like the fully vaccinated no longer being required to wear masks, and we get to see each other's faces again. Right? And there are the bigger indicators, like the lower number of hospitalizations and deaths. Other positive things at Most Sacred Heart, we've finished our in-person school year safely and wonderfully. As of Friday, we are no longer short-staffed. More people are coming back to church in person, and there's no pressure on that, right? And it's wonderful to see folks. And at the same time, and evidently there are a number of people like me in this way, in the midst of all that good news these days, I personally find myself crying a bit more easily than normal. For background, I am someone who takes in bad news much more quickly than good news. When there's a crisis, I'm usually fully there. For example, if there's a tragic funeral, I'm usually so nervous to do a good job that I don't cry. It's when everybody leaves that my tears start flowing. Something like that seems to be happening inside of me now, and perhaps in you. When I noticed this, it helped me to remember what a friend of mine, a PhD clinical psychologist, had said a few weeks ago. He told me that for folks, a lot of folks, there were immediate and shocking crises, right? People who buried loved ones during the pandemic, who lost jobs, who were on a ventilator. Their trauma is immediate and deep. But he said, don't be surprised at how many of the rest of us start feeling the effects of this trauma surface in us the next few months as well. There were so many losses. Birthdays, anniversaries, baptisms, weddings, graduations, and countless other events that were just so different than we had hoped for. There's that toll of the uncertainty and the fear we lived with. Then, how the question of wearing masks became a political thing, dividing friends and families. All of that against the background of the ugly politics of this last election cycle, the killing of George Floyd and the underbelly of racism that showed itself, the increased awareness of the inequities in our healthcare system, all the while so many of us trying to learn how to homeschool our kids or to work from home, how to grocery shop, how to connect to family or friends, plus the regular stuff that can make life hard, and on, right? And now here we seem to be turning some kind of an important corner in our fight against this pandemic. And many people are feeling, I think, a sense of relief and of hope. And this has happened to me a number of times. Even as many people are telling me how good it feels to take off their masks, they just start crying. I think the disciples in today's gospel would understand. On this feast of the Trinity, a feast that celebrates the loving relationship that is at the heart of the universe, our gospel tells the story of a group of disciples trying to come out of trauma themselves. They had seen heartbreaking suffering, great brutality, and the death of their beloved Jesus. And they wondered how they would go on, or if they even wanted to. Yet now their Jesus had been raised from the dead and starts showing up in their midst. And one might think, great, it's all over. The reality is that incredibly good news did not suddenly make everything okay for them. Today we see that they were like not all totally overjoyed, right? Some of them believed, some didn't. And then there is this little scriptural detail. There were 11 disciples who set out today, not 12. I would imagine they still felt the sting of the loss of Judas, one of their cohort, their friend who had betrayed them, betrayed Jesus, and then killed himself. Their band of followers was one less, and their mixture of emotions had to be all over the place. And it's that way for most of us too, I would think. I mean, life is just such a mixture, right? You know, our relief is mixed with the feeling of ongoing vulnerability. Am I safe now? Our grief at the losses and our frustrations at those who don't seem to get it. Our gratitude for the simple blessings we used to take for granted, and 100 other things. And what do we do with all that surface enough these days? This is way too brief, but just a few thoughts. First, we just gotta name it. See it, name it, and it's okay. Fact is, it's okay to not be okay. And naming it is so important because I've long believed that what we don't deal with will deal with us. Please be gentle with what's in there. And know that you are not alone. We're in it together. We are. And today, Jesus tells us that He is with us always and right now. Secondly, Jesus then gives us this call to action. Now, to explain why that is important, let me tell you of a brilliant priest friend of mine who suffers from depression. He never liked how his medication makes him feel. He kind of like dulls a little bit of his thinking. And so over the years, he would sometimes wean himself off of it. Unfortunately, then his world would get very dark and he would have growing suicidal ideations. Now, in recent years, he's promised his closest friends that he would never do that again, and that if he was tempted to do so, he would first talk with us. But once, when he was in the middle of a very dark time, do you know what helped him? He said what saved him was that he presided at a funeral. There was something about caring for others who were hurting that touched into that part of him which lasted, that place in him where he was both himself and more than himself. Today, Jesus visits this somewhat beaten up group of 11 and says, go love this world, baptize them, teach them, get to work, love this world. And that's our call as well. There's something changes in us when we serve. And I'm not so naive as to believe for a second that suddenly makes everything okay, but it is truly a part of our healing. So, if these days are pretty good for you, savor them. Seriously, savor them. There is so much for which to be grateful. And if these days are tough for you, you are not alone. And if it ever gets really dark for you and you wonder about going on or not, please reach out. Call me, seriously, or someone you love. And for most of us, these days are likely a mixture of both, right? A mixture of a lot of things. It looks like it's been that way for followers of Jesus from the beginning.